recast gender relations. These are the key messages in the paper, Women O Independent Mind, that I've brought together with contributions from women across Scotland. And it's an attempt to take a look underneath key policy issues: employment, economic development, taxation, criminal and civil justice, political institutions, and critically, women's involvement in Scotland's future constitution. The paper takes an overview across 6 areas: women in the constitution, economic, taxation and fiscal policy, integrated tax and benefit systems to the rest of us, welfare and social protection that works for women, employment protection, the elimination of violence against women, and representation in public, political and corporate governance. And we present some ideas of where fiscal autonomy and a Scottish taxation regime, improved equalities legislation, alternative employment and economic development policies and approaches to social investment would make a difference for women. Because quite frankly, I think the question is, what difference will independence or the status quo make for women? And that difference has to be a positive difference, because the status quo is not an option. Every 13 minutes, a woman in Scotland experiences violence. 62% of unpaid carers are women. Twice as many women as men rely on benefits and tax credits. Women are 95% of lone parents who receive income support. Women earn less than 13% of men as full-time workers and 34% less as part-time workers. Only 15% of senior police and 25% of our senior justiciary are women. 10% of the national newspaper editors, 36% of MSPs, 24% of councillors and 3% of council leaders and 26% of trade union leaders are women. The status quo is not an option. And the key difference that we can make is not just independence, not just the constitutional, the formal arrangements, but making sure women are built into that process through building a constitution for an independent Scotland and involving women in policy making and ensuring gender analysis throughout that policy process. And in the paper we discuss alternative employment and economic policies, how they would bring more women into the labour market. It follows that if the current structural and policy constraints that reinforce occupational segregation, where women and men are concentrated in particular job roles, and the consequences of low pay and promotion opportunity, the failure to support women's enterprise, and ignoring the impact of changes to taxation and benefits imposed by Westminster, if those impacts are made transparent and removed, then there would be more opportunity for women to seek and stay in better jobs, pay tax and move out of poverty. In the paper we advocate a caring economy, a balance of rights and care, that the right to care and to be protected from discrimination and disadvantage should and must be an aspiration in an independent Scotland. An economy that values the provision of care and who provides care. A caring economy that doesn't encourage a race to the bottom of poor employment practices such as 0 hours contracts, the inbuilt discrimination in the skills and labour markets, and the erosion of workers' rights to challenge discrimination as imposed by Westminster Government in the introduction of employment tribunal fees. Alternative social protection and welfare systems would invest in well-being over the life cycle, eliminating discrimination and supporting caring, not penalising women. The ideas in the paper echo the proposals from the expert group on welfare. The central point of this paper is that whatever proposals are made, they should have women's autonomy and equality at the centre. The austerity measures imposed by the UK government initially were meant to be 60% and 40% of restriction on public funding and increase in taxation. According to the UK Women's Budget Group, it's 80% of reduction in public spending as opposed to 20% in the taxation regime. But of those measures, 75% of the withdrawal has been shouldered by women, has affected women's income directly. Now we know from the academic literature that political opportunities like independence, devolution, new political structures present opportunities for advancing women's equality. And Women for Independence, Radical Independence Campaign, and the women here all represent campaigns and ideas and the wealth of ideas that there are out there in the Scottish independence debate. So we know that the political space opens up to promote ideas and to press for change as feminists and as campaigners for women. But that change needs to continue beyond the 18th of September. And the ideas generated here need political will across parties and across civil society to continue. The real change in the policies and reality for women needs political will from whoever is in power, needs political will and support from across civil society and across the political spectrum. It needs women to be part of these political processes and institutions, and needs effective gender analysis to get underneath key policy areas and look at what they mean for women and men, and to make sure that they work for the benefit of women and men. In the paper we propose that making sure women are involved in the constitution of a new Scotland would bring alternatives to the table. An end to violence and the threat of violence for all. Allocation of public resources to promote equality and eliminate discrimination in public spending. An independent Scotland in charge of its own taxation and social protection system could and should abolish regressive taxation and benefits such as those introduced at Westminster and that have made women worse off. An independent Scotland can revoke the tribunal fees that are harming access to justice for claims of discrimination and equal rights. And an independent Scotland can build on the progress under devolution in naming and tackling violence against women and in bringing a gender analysis to public policy decisions and institutions. They're the key messages from Women of Independent Mind and the key messages to talk about today and into the future.
That's great. So much of the grassroots campaign, an enormous amount of the campaign on the ground has been about the problems of Britain's low-wage economy and the impact of the punitive changes in the social security and welfare system that we're seeing from Westminster just now. And what I think this paper tells us is that, first of all, these hit women disproportionately hard. Low wages hit women disproportionately hard, and I think 75% of the changes, of the impact of changes in welfare and social security are impacting on women. And I think the second thing that it tells us is it doesn't have to be like that. Other countries have done this better. In fact, most other countries have done this better in the developed world. And there are identifiable policies and practices which made it better there. The UK has chosen not to pursue these policies and practices, but an independent Scotland could. Let me just ask, Angela, what would you pick as a couple of the key policy changes that you would prioritise if Scotland became independent that would make a big difference for women?
I think one of the things we advocate in the paper is a citizens' basic income, and others on the table will talk to that as well, but guaranteeing an income over the lifetime and the life cycle. And I think looking at the various models, as you say, of social protection where the investment is in the welfare and well-being of the citizen over the life cycle, recognising women's role in childcare, in child rearing, and in other aspects of care, and the increasing squeeze on women and men in our demographic changes. I think policy and structural change that has to happen is gender analysis of public spending and revenue generation. How we generate, who we collect tax from and how, and recognising that's highly gendered, highly skewed, and that taxation should be on an individual, not a household basis. And that we should ensure that the prospective impact of how we spend money, public money, is properly assessed for its potential to perpetuate discrimination in the way that the Modern Apprenticeship programme in Scotland currently does, for example. So to eliminate that. And we can look to examples very close to home. We can look to examples in, for example, in Iceland, where, and I talk about this in the paper, where following their transitions, recent transitions in Iceland, the Ministry for Finance in Iceland now has as its mission statement the welfare and well-being of citizens. So we're not making it up. Others are way ahead of us on this. We have a good track record in Scotland to date. In at least since 2009, there's an equality statement attached to the budget. We're the only country within the UK to have that. So there has been some incremental progress, but others are passing us by. Austria in 2009 introduced gender analysis of public spending as part of their constitutional reform, just part of the kind of everyday business really of just rejigging some of their governmental procedures. So they now have a requirement across government departments to ensure that spending decisions are assessed on their gender, for their gender impact. And we can look to all sorts of examples in devolved governments and quasi-federal governments across Europe and globally. So I think a citizens' basic income, a focus on well-being, a focus on well-being across the life cycle, and ensuring that public policy decisions are assessed for the impact on women and men, and to have as a central political goal women's equality. And that there's not an add-on, and it's not add women and stir after the fact, and regressive remedial policies that end up with the kinds of effects we're seeing from the benefits and taxation reform or deconstruction that we're seeing at welfare, and that have ignored and disregard the impact on women.
And just a last question, presumably Westminster could do these things, and you seem to have little confidence they will do these things. Why?
Well, Westminster not only could do these things, they should do these things. Any government, any public authority is bound by the provisions of the Equality Act to conduct an equality impact assessment of budgetary proposals, policy proposals and legislative decisions. And the UK budget does not have an equality impact assessment. They do a household distributional analysis, but they don't actually mention women. They don't mention gender. They don't look to the composition of the household. So they're in breach, potentially, of their own legislation. And that was challenged as far back as 2010. And it was found that they hadn't done an equality impact assessment. So what we advocate in the paper is an extension of that, the implementation of that kind of public duty to subject all policy proposals to equality impact assessment. It's there already, the implementation needs to be a lot stronger, and to apply that as well to employers. But that's a whole other story in terms of the employment implications. And that we know, again, and we talk about this in the paper, the ongoing discrimination there is against women in pregnancy, in return from work following maternity leave, in flexible working, and the consequences of that caring gap for women's economic independence. And there's every opportunity for us to address that in a caring economy in a future Scotland.
And I think it is, if anyone's in any doubt, I think it's very interesting. You look at this leaflet, £15 billion has been taken out of the pockets of people in Scotland because of welfare cuts. 75%, £3 out of every £4 that has been taken away from women. And I think that's a very important message. The cuts in welfare are not just something that happens to people generally, there's something that happens 3 times more to women than they do to men. Perhaps I'll just ask everyone, we'll just go from the right along and just ask any questions generally about why it is that you think that women's interests are best served by independence, and I'm sure that a lot of people will also be interested what you think it is that can bring women round to seeing this. What will change minds in the last 4 weeks of this campaign? Or any other point that you would like to discuss, Morag?
Well, I suppose what works for me is the idea of the possibilities of what independence could do to create a better future for women than a status quo which is tending to actually entrench inequalities and seek to have women pay more and more for the errors of highly paid, mainly male financiers, for example. And women in Scotland know that they're being hit hard here. It is no surprise when you think that, for example, the bedroom tax mostly affects women because it's mostly women who live in social housing. And when their children leave home, they're going to be left with a house with an extra bedroom. So of course those women are clearly going to be hit by that kind of targeted policy. Why target that policy rather than any other? What we have the opportunity to do in Scotland, for example, is find a way of achieving housing that is affordable to people living on the wages that people are paid in this country, instead of relying on punitive measures and the people who are least able to defend themselves against those measures and who face very bleak futures because their circumstances are ignored. So for women who are living in poverty and are much more likely to be living in poverty than men, then they need to think really carefully about whether the future could be different for them and that they could play a more active role in that.
People often don't associate housing with being a women's issue. Would you argue that housing is very much a women's issue?
Absolutely, because there's very strong, and that this reinforces Angela's point about actually understanding the difference that public policy decisions make for women and men, because women and men have very different lives. Women are very overrepresented in social housing, and couples and men are more strongly represented in other forms of housing, including owner occupation. So it's particularly women on their own, particularly lone parents and single women, who are likely to be in the social housing, who've been targeted to pay the price for the poor financial management that we've had in the UK in recent years.
Kathleen, any thoughts on both what independence can mean for women, but also a lot of people seem to have taken for granted that women have been more cautious in this campaign. Do you think there's a reason? Is it perhaps, is there something, some messages that will help women to change positions in the last 4 weeks?
Our experience working on the ground isn't so much that women are cautious, so much that they are later to engage. And I'd be interested, I mean, I don't know if any of, I know this isn't your area of academia, but that kind of, when people engage in a debate, women are only now starting to engage, and it's I think women are busy. They're just busy. Some of us have been 2 years running around thinking about every pressure group, every this, or what's the couple, what's Alex Salmon saying, what's that. Women have been busy raising their children, going to work, and now that it's getting close, we are seeing women starting to focus. We're seeing a growth in membership of Women for Independence, growth in the number of women coming along. What issues are going to turn them on or turn them off to the independence proposition? I don't think women are more fearsome or more scared or somehow, you know, inadequate compared to men. They just are coming at it. And what we need to do is these, you know, the wonderful issues that have been put forward today, these kind of issues, because women do understand about poverty, they understand it in a very direct and hands-on way. So the kind of messages today that, and you know, who cares what the currency is? Will I have a roof over my head? Will I be able to feed my bairns? And these are the issues we're starting to move on to here, and that's what I think will help women to engage and come to yes.
It's been quite a male campaign on the television. Is that reflected in the ground?
It's been, every campaign I've ever been involved in, and I'm nearly 50, has been quite a male campaign on the television, so the Scottish Independence campaign is not unique. On the ground is very interesting. I don't want to go into some of the dynamics of groups, and some areas Women for Independence have become very strong because of the maleness of the Yes campaign, because there's been meetings held in pubs that women don't feel safe in going to, because there's been laddism and photos of women in bikinis holding up Yes signs was one of the more unfortunate pictures I saw in this campaign. So where this is happening, women have taken to organising autonomously, and that's been quite interesting. And I think, you know, I don't want to criticise the Yes campaign because I'm part of it, but on the other hand, I am not standing there as a cheer and say that it's been brilliant about gender equality and it's really taken things on board. But if that happens, that's why Women for Independence exists. We fill a vacuum, we provide a safe place for women.
That's great. Kat, your thoughts? You've obviously just published a book, which I'll wave again, Scottish Independence, a feminist perspective. Anything from that you think is particularly relevant? Or of course you've been very closely involved with ground campaigns. What's your perception?
Well, look, I think there's two different campaigns happening. One's happening in the establishment, where political power is already established, patriarchy is entrenched, and there's one that's happening at a grassroots level, where women are powering the campaigns at a grassroots level. They're the ones taking control of the group, they're the ones like taking control of meetings, they're the ones that are leading the debate on the ground. Yeah, I just wanted to maybe mention the reasons we'd written the book, and it came from a frustration of the question that has just asked about women being more cautious and things like that. It came from a frustration at that type of argument. So firstly, obviously women aren't this homogenous block that just exists as women. You've got class differences, race differences, sexuality, all these different things intermingling within women as a demographic. We got really frustrated, myself and my co-author Jenny, that the reasons that were being given by the Yes campaign that women weren't intending to vote yes was because women were more cautious. They just needed more convincing. The Yes campaign needed to talk more about women's issues. That was their argument. And on the no side we had, no, women need security. They need to know exactly where they stand. Women need to have these things guaranteed, which is quite a bizarre argument actually, because it's the inverse of traditional sexist arguments, which is that women are emotional and irrational and do things with their heart and not their head. So it's quite a strange argument. But we didn't feel that either of them really had any traction. And when we started looking into what different women were saying about the campaign and doing our initial research, we came across a quote on the Bella Caledonia blog. And it's the start of our book, and it was an unnamed woman from one of these Women for Independence meetings that are happening up and down the country. And what she said was, we're told independence will be better, but we need to know what better would look like. If things were going to be just the same, then what's the point? And it's that last bit, if things are going to be just the same, then what's the point? And I think that was part of the initial Yes campaign was very much blue skies thinking, don't worry, we'll keep the Queen, we'll keep the pound, things will be the same, just vote yes. And we wanted to put forward an argument that we want nothing to be the same. We want a radical restructuring of society. We want to unravel institutions that have replicated sexism, anti-working class ideas and racism in society, unpick them and restitch them the way that we want to see them. Yesterday, there was the press conference yesterday about the working class vote. And I think independence is a class issue, but gender lies at the heart of class. And for 30 years, political change for women has not happened. For working class women, for the last 30 years, change has meant changing the interests of a rich, white, male elite. That's what political change means for women. And we've got to go out there and convince women that this is something different. And I think that's ultimately what we've got to do for the next 4 weeks. So that's kind of why we wrote the book, was to make that case. And it is just finally on this point, it is the things that remain reserved to Westminster that we need to take control of if we're going to have that radical change that I talked about. And it's things like absolute control of the economy and being able to take control of social security provision. It is how power is represented and it being at this elite level and not engaging with the grassroots. And it is other policies on things like foreign policy and defence. That Britain has created itself as a country obsessed with its own military power and cares more about investing in nuclear weapons than it does about providing security for its citizens, real security, whether that's in the home, in the workplace, and so on. So it's having control of those things that will actually improve the lot of women in Scotland and beyond.
So the perception seems to have got into this campaign that to get the women's vote you have to reassure them that nothing will change. You would argue that to get the women's vote you have to reassure them that things will definitely change.
Yes.
Well, that's a fairly straight message. Deborah, what would you like to add?
I just wanted to add briefly, first of all, I don't feel that it's about bringing women round as if they're maybe waiting for somebody to come and lead them to something. For me, it's very much a case of, as the Women for Indie listening exercises, it's about listening. And it's about listening to what people want and what people need to actually move forward as part of the human race on this little tiny country and this huge planet. One of the things I was going to say is I think the figures are skewed when they're saying that women are going to tend to vote no, or women are tending to kind of keep back from the campaign. I don't think that that's true. I think that the results from the RIC mass canvass cover all genders and all types of households, and the figures there say people are going to be voting yes. And pollsters don't call working class women. They really don't. The people that we are going to speak to on the doorsteps, the women that we are talking to on the doorsteps when we're out canvassing, haven't heard from anybody. They haven't heard from anybody. They don't get called, they don't fill in online forms, and they don't get polled. And these are the people that are already saying yes. As to the ones that either are no or undecided, it isn't about going out to kind of gather them in, but it's about finding what they want to know, and showing them a path, as I said, a path to change rather than a path to the status quo.
So you would argue that actually there's a lot more engagement from women, particularly in working class
Working
areas,
classes,
than the perception has been picked up.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in on that because just before, you know, we started the press conference, we were talking about, you know, and it is anecdotal evidence, but it's from our campaign, it's the campaign on the ground, and it's our evidence, is that the women that we know are voting yes.
Oh, yes.
The women that we're reaching out to who might be undecided are becoming convinced of the case for yes. And actually, I think that the group I come across who are mostly voting no is men of a certain age and a certain background. And I think that this, on the grassroots campaign, this seems to be the group that's actually voting no, and it's men 50 plus from a working class background who now consider themselves middle class. And it's people who have benefited from social democracy at Westminster, who benefited from, you know, getting grants to go to university, people who were given like a hand up out of the situation that they were in. And what they don't understand, like, and yeah, I'm talking about people like my dad, other people's parents, you know, people of my age, like our parents, who seem to be very reluctant on independence. What they don't seem to understand is that social democracy in Britain is finished. It is over. There will never be a social democratic consensus under the status quo again. And I think that that's a really key message for women. Women benefit from social democracy and that type of policy. And under the UK, that type of social democracy is not possible anymore. The consensus of the UK is neoliberalism, and that's going to continue for, you know, the next 3 decades and on into the future unless we get a yes vote.
And can I perhaps just finally ask, well, first of all, if there's any final comments anybody wanted to make, but I did want to particularly ask for the information of journalists, what's planned for All Women for India and the other campaigns in the coming 4 weeks?
We have just taken delivery of, today, I think 100,000 leaflets that are going out all around the country. We have everything from cocktails and questions with Dr. Philippa Whitford in AllYes on Saturday night. We have a day of action in Perth on Saturday. So down in Dumfries, they've got a sort of a wine and nibbles. Some of our events are like that, but we've also got street stalls. I was out with a group of women from the south side last night who are looking at perhaps doing some kind of social event where people have to pledge to have 10 conversations. Because I think one of the ways women campaign is very interesting. They have conversations. One of our women last night was talking about how she talked round her, the woman who was doing her eyebrows, whatever it is women do to their eyebrows, getting them threaded. And so she was talking about the independence referendum to her. So what we're trying to do is get women to do that and to take that. But so everything is happening with Women for Independence. It's chaotic, it's busy, we're trying to keep it, we're running full time to keep on top of what's coming in terms of requests for speakers, school debates, everything like that happening. I've never been involved in a campaign like this before in my life, and I'm older than most of the people in this panel. So the next 4 weeks will just be busy, busy, busy and fabulous, and we're going to get to yes.
Do you have a centralised place where people can look up?
They can look up our website or email us at info@womenforindependence.org.
Well, can I just say then, in wrapping this up today, that as the boy on the panel, feeling slightly cowed by all of these strong women, my perception, if nothing else, has been that I can't remember a time in Scottish politics when women's voices have been so strong. It really has brought so many women into this campaign, some who've been involved before and some who haven't, on a cause which has united a lot of people, you know, across genders and class and politics and all sorts of things. But I think it's been absolutely wonderful to see the rise of Women for Independence and the messages which frankly weren't often in the mainstream media in this country, and they're still not as much as they should be. But it's great to be talking again about issues which are related to women on a national political debate which often hasn't really involved those. And the activism and the commitment and the involvement of people, I think, is incredibly positive for whatever happens at the outcome of this referendum and what we do next. And I think it's also wonderful. This paper that we've launched today sets out a very strong and clear vision of what can be done. That it's not just about, oh well, things are kind of a rubbish and it's not fair, is it? But much more to the point, we have the knowledge about how we can change things and make things better for the lives of women in this country. We can do it by looking at other countries who've done it better, and by looking at practices which are carried out in this country, which work, but which are not used enough. And if we can use these, and if we can get this kind of an agenda embedded into the politics of Scotland, we have a real chance of making a fundamental change in how women experience life and how they experience government in this country. And what I think is very interesting is, unless anyone knows, I can't think of a feminist or women's group which has emerged in support of Westminster during this campaign.
It's Women Together.
But
There's a group called Women Together.
Another AstroTurf.
well, I must admit that shows you I've been in the campaign for 2 years now and I hadn't seen any material from them whatsoever. So I think it's been a wonderful opportunity this to open up ideas and questions right across the full gamut, and it's been an absolute joy today to sit and hear such a strong vision of what Scotland could be from 5 such strong women.
Could we take some questions perhaps? Is there time for that?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I want to come back, Angela, to this notion in this Women of Independent Mind that equality and autonomy are at the core of this. So in fact, an issue which is sort of dear to my heart is child welfare, child health and child education. And of course one of the opportunities of independence is the potential to really focus in on that area through universal childcare and early years provision, recognising that it permits access to the workplace for many, many more women too. So could you speak a little bit to the opportunity that offers women and children in that future independent Scotland?
I think one of the crucial things about childcare, and we touch on this in the paper, and it follows arguments made by our friend Ailsa Mackay, which is that if we continue to think of childcare as a women's issue, then we continue to reinforce the gender stereotypes and the gender relations that busy women have to deal with. And I think that was absolutely brilliant. Women are not cautious, women are busy. Yeah. And the reality of women's lives, whatever set up they're in, the reality is that it's women that end up sorting out the childcare, or that women end up trying to balance their access to paid employment with their caring responsibilities, rather than those caring responsibilities being shared. And what we're proposing in a future Scotland is transforming that view of childcare. That childcare is a public good. It's in all our interests that children are well cared for in a flexible, affordable, accessible, publicly funded system. The mixed economy of childcare means a mixed outcome for families in terms of how they're managing their time, how they're managing their own paid work opportunities. So in the paper we pick up on stuff that's come out of Women in Scotland's Economy Research Centre at Glasgow Caledonian University, talking about this transformative approach to childcare, talking about childcare not as a women's issue, but reframing as a public good and part of our economic infrastructure. So we're with child welfare at its core, but a system that is a public investment, capital investment in the infrastructure, and investment in a well-qualified, well-paid workforce, who in turn are paying tax, who are contributing, so expanding that workforce, not hiding behind accounting, idiosyncrasies of accounting systems that count roads but not nurseries as capital investments. Go figure, who makes those rules? So getting underneath all of that, and at the core of that is the argument about valuing care and who provides care. Why is it, to quote another colleague, Christian Rimmery, who talks about why is it that we pay, much as we all need the services of plumbers in our houses, why is it that a plumber is paid more than a childcare worker? Why is it that care assistants are paid amongst the lowest paid workers in our society? We don't value care, and we don't value care because we associate it with women. And in the labour market, it's mainly mainly women providing those services, and in precarious and undervalued and underpaid jobs. That's what we need to change, and that's what we can change.
Yes,
So
a quick follow-up. I want to bring you all in, of course, and especially Kat as well, in your book in relation to this. So you speak of the Constitution and the role that women ought to play in helping us as a society properly frame a Constitution with equality at its core. So I think that this is an exciting issue for me to contemplate, the extent to which you can embed in the Constitution this type of equality agenda.
Well, we wouldn't be the first to do it. I mean, equality as a defining principle exists in many constitutions around the world. And the trick, though, is whether we live up to that. We need we can have the political commitments, but we need women to be part of the process. To pick up on Kat's point about interests, there's a lot of protecting of interests going on, and that's what we've seen happen in previous political change as well. Devolution was a very significant advance in terms of women's representation, in terms of getting women's equality on the table, but we've seen quite a lot of slip back as the nested interests as well as the vested interests come into play. And whose interests are we protecting with the status quo, and whose interests would we advance with the change of independence and with taking control of our taxation, of our social protection and well-being and welfare systems? The interests of women and children and men in Scotland, I think.
Would anyone else make any final comments on that? Or any things that
I think the thing I want to add to that is that childcare is such a good example, and the different treatment of childcare and, say, construction employment is just a perfect example of the huge problem that exists across the world where, as to how countries measure well-being and progress and growth, because it's measured and it's old. That's the problem. That the way we measure national accounts, the way we measure the thing called gross domestic product, is from a bygone era when only men mattered, apparently, and where they measured construction as infrastructure investment and childcare as leisure, because that's how they measured it. So the point about this is if one of the opportunities we need to grasp if we are looking at developing a constitution for Scotland is a measure of well-being which works for all the people of Scotland, not just the people who run businesses. And that way we might finally get a decent understanding of how well our country is. Who's struggling, who's doing well, who should give up a little bit, who needs to get a bit more. And until we stop measuring our well-being by this thing called GDP, we're not really going to be able to do that. We'll always be struggling to argue for a different measure. Now, we need a debate about what that measure is. Oxfam have argued for a humankind index, for example, but it has to take account of people and the state of their lives, and at the very least it needs to recognise that childcare is in the national interest. It's not a leisure pursuit that women do for the benefit of men.
I'm just struck with the idea that big data meets equality, because in some sense what we're dealing with here is the large data set we have out there and the analysis of it, the discernment of pattern and structure. Wow.
And we make a couple of demands in our book about, and one of them is ending methodological bias and actually taking account of what the responsibilities that women have burdened on them. The other demands that we make, in terms of the care and the child care policy that's in the white paper, is that this is just not fair enough. And I think what you said is absolutely spot on. And actually in your question, there's a little clue there, because you originally said because this childcare will allow women to get access to the workplace. Well, what is the point of allowing people access to the workplace, or enabling access to the workplace, is probably a better way to put it, when that workplace is precarious work, when it is badly paid, when you can't join a trade union because you're frightened of your boss. So there are other policies that feed into that whole thing, and this is a joined up approach.
Well,
so the other demands that we were making are, a compulsory living wage, making precarious employment illegal, and a restoration of trade union rights, because these are all important things for women, and there's no point in forcing women into a job market that is deeply gendered, that forces them into low paid work. And the possibilities of independence, with having like gender mainstreaming, having a Green New Deal that has sustainable, worthwhile work that, you know, makes you feel good about what you're doing. These are the possibilities we've got. And ultimately, it's the construction of a new egalitarian society that puts women's time, labour, access to power on a par with everybody else's, because we're not just an other in society. And that's how we've been treated for a very, very long time.
Well, I mean, the common
majority,
view, the common wheel view that's expressed, where basically you end up having a higher wage economy as well. Again, basically not just enshrining a constitution, but creating an economy where that's possible. And I think the excitement for me, as a sort of a scientist looking at the macroeconomics of Scotland, is the Nesta report, Small is Beautiful, which quantifies exactly the scale of growth opportunity there is in Scotland if we have access to our resources and our fiscal decision making.
Well, that's been another great morning. Thank you very much for everybody. Same time tomorrow. Thanks.